Growing up as a Muslim, I was bombarded with stories of how amazing the Prophet Muhammad was. His humility, kindness, devotion, selflessness, courage, and mercy were the recurring themes in these stories about a man who was presented as the ideal role model, a man that all Muslims should emulate. But once I started having doubts about my faith, I also began to question how good of a role model Muhammad actually was. Of course, one of the most prevalent criticisms, and rightly so in my opinion, leveled against Muhammad is the fact that one of his wives, Aisha, was 6 years old when he married her and 9 years old when he consummated the marriage, according to trusted and accepted hadiths. I've covered that topic in depth in another video, which you can find below in the video description. For this video, I wanted to discuss a lesser known but also profoundly troubling event in Muhammad's life, the massacre of the Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza. The story begins in 622 AD. Islam is a new religion. It's only been 12 years since Muhammad received the first revelation of the Quran. In those 12 years, Muhammad and his followers faced mounting persecution and violence in his hometown of Mecca. To escape this persecution, the Muslims migrated or made the hijrah to Yathrib, a colony roughly 400 kilometers to the north. Yathrib, which would later become known as Medina, had tribes that supported Muhammad's cause and that also converted to Islam. At the time, Medina was essentially a group of small fortified hamlets, each occupied by a different tribe. The various tribes who converted to Islam became known as the Ansar. They commingled with several Jewish tribes, and all of these tribes fought one another constantly. With Muhammad's arrival, he became an arbitrator who negotiated truces between the feuding tribes. Several Jewish tribes also signed pacts of peace and tolerance with Muhammad. Mecca was immediately threatened by the city and growing religion to the north, especially when Muhammad began sending raiding parties to attack Mecca's trade caravans. After two major battles that more or less left the status quo intact, one of those battles which was an attempted attack of Medina, in 627 AD, Mecca attacked Medina once again. Heavily outnumbered, the Muslims prevailed in what would become known as the Battle of the Trench, so called because Muhammad ordered the digging of a trench as a defensive position around Medina. In the backdrop of all these battles, the Muslims of Medina were facing internal issues with some of the Jewish tribes. Despite the agreements they signed, 3 Jewish tribes plotted to destroy Muhammad, threatened as they were by his growing political power. When 2 of the tribes staged revolts and threatened Muhammad's life, he expelled them from Medina. As for the 3rd Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza, they plotted with Mecca during the Battle of the Trench, at a crucial moment when the small community of Muslims was at the brink of destruction. With the Muslims victorious, what to do with the treacherous Banu Qurayza had to be determined. Surrounded by the Muslim army, the Banu Qurayza were presented with a few difficult options: fight to the death, or surrender and hope for mercy from Muhammad. In the end, they picked a different path. They offered to accept the judgment of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, one of the Ansar of Medina who had recently converted to Islam, and a man who the leaders of Banu Qurayza trusted. Whatever he decided, they would abide by it. What happens next is shared in this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. When the tribe of Banu Qurayza was ready to accept Sa'ad's judgment, Allah's messenger sent for Sa'ad, who was near to him. Sa'ad came riding a donkey, and when he came near, Allah's messenger said to the Ansar, "Stand up for your leader." Then Sa'ad came and sat beside Allah's messenger, who said to him, "These people are ready to accept your judgment." Sa'ad said, "I give the judgment that their warriors should be killed and their children and women should be taken as prisoners." The Prophet then remarked, "O Sa'ad, you have judged amongst them with or similar to the judgment of the King Allah." Now, why did he make this judgment, which, as the hadith says, is similar to the judgment of Allah? I had trouble finding a good source that wasn't Muslim, but I did find a source, historian Karen Armstrong, who described the judgment as an Arab custom. But one common Muslim apologist theory is that he was basing his judgment on the laws and traditions that the Jewish tribe followed. And sure enough, in the book of Deuteronomy, the following is written: "When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves, and you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies." And so, in accordance with Ibn Wahab's judgment, he died soon after from wounds he sustained in the Battle of the Trench, by the way. And with the approval of Muhammad, the 700 men of the Banu Qurayza were executed and the women and children sold as slaves. There's a few viewpoints on why this judgment was executed and what it says about Islam and Muhammad. So let's take a look at a few of them. One view from outside the Muslim world is that this incident is simply one of the first of many examples of Islam's hatred and intolerance of Jewish people. Namely, that Muhammad massacred hundreds of Jewish people in cold blood because of their treacherous and parasitic nature as Muslims perceived it. And the Muslims have since often viewed and treated Jewish people as treacherous parasites, a perspective that is rooted in the beginnings and continuation of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, the overall issue of anti-Semitism within Islam is likely going to be the subject of a future video, and there's been several surveys that show Muslims have negative views of Jewish people today. But in the meantime, regarding this specific incident, I think there is a strong argument that the actions undertaken were not anti-Semitic, but rather reflective of the norms of the era, where these kinds of mass executions and taking possession of women and children were more commonplace. One detail that backs this argument up is that the other Jewish tribes who didn't plot against Muhammad remained in Medina, and the Quran continued to instruct Muslims to behave respectfully to the people of the book, such as Jewish people and Christians, and to continue to stress what they all held in common. That being said, it is possible that this incident has been used to inspire or legitimize anti-Semitism by Muslims in subsequent centuries and by Muslims today. Now here's another view, this one commonly held by Muslims. Muhammad didn't want to do these horrible things to the Banu Qurayza. They are against his merciful nature, but his hands were tied by tradition and political necessity. The argument then also becomes that the Banu Qurayza were simply punished according to their own laws, so it wasn't an act of cruelty. Muhammad was merely following their own rules. So I have a problem with this Muslim apologist defense for a couple reasons. First of all, let's say that the judgment against the Banu Qurayza was based on that part of Deuteronomy in the Bible. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, perhaps one of you watching can help out here and comment if you know more about this. But to me, it reads more about what Israelites should do in war against other tribes, rather than a law that Israelites should follow themselves. But honestly, this is all besides the point. All Muslims are taught is how Islam came to rectify the errors of past faiths like Judaism, and how the Quran was God's true revelation rather than the human-altered Bible. So why would there not be an Islamic judgment, one of mercy, which is supposedly what Islam is all about? The apologist's argument goes something like this. Islam was still young and vulnerable. The Quran was still incomplete. Under its proper hegemony, these kinds of horrible acts would be rare, if they needed to happen at all. But the brutal realities of the world meant that the Muslim community couldn't fully transition away yet from the dark and troubling practices of the status quo. Change is gradual, and this action against the Banu Qurayza served a greater purpose in the end of safeguarding Islam. But I'm not convinced. At this point, I want to reflect on the Muhammad I was taught, the Muhammad who is loved by hundreds of millions of Muslims, kind, caring, selfless, compassionate, merciful. Just think about all these labels for a moment. I also want to reflect on the Islam that I was taught, the religion of love, tolerance, and peace, the religion that came to change things, to make the world a better place, to show us what the right and true path is. Think about the Quran, the miracle that transformed the course of history and gave us the path towards redemption. I then want you to reflect on how the execution of the men of Banu Qurayza fits these narratives of Muhammad and Islam. If we view Muhammad and the first Muslims through the lens of a warlord and a group of people starting a new man-made movement that was trying to survive in the tough world of 7th century Arabia, the actions taken against the Banu Qurayza fit perfectly. If we view Muhammad as a one-of-a-kind prophet, sent from the creator of the universe with a message of peace, mercy, and love, and the first Muslims as the birthplace of the ideal society, do the actions taken against the Banu Qurayza fit perfectly? At these pivotal moments of the religion's birth, I want you to visualize the realities of what happened to that tribe. Imagine hundreds and hundreds of men put to death. Imagine the fear in the last moments of their lives, the anguish and grief of the surviving women and children, condemned to slavery. Was this a defensible necessity due to the realities of the time for the one true religion? Is Islam a flawed man-made phenomenon that allowed and continues to allow countless acts of violence to happen under its name and through its laws? Would the Muhammad I idolized as a young Muslim, and that hundreds of millions idolize today, have allowed such a barbaric thing to happen, even if it was the norm or custom for that time and place? Would that Muhammad have intervened and shown mercy as he'd done before and after? Time and time again with these stories, the beauty and grace of Islam blurs into the cruelty and barbarism of our world. And in the end, all the elements that supposedly make it transcend humanity vanish without a trace. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, please subscribe if you appreciate this content and want more of it. I'm Secular Spirit, and I'll be back with more content for this upcoming Ramadan.